There are moments when life slows down, moments so sharp they cut right through the noise. This is one of those moments. A 95-year-old veteran, Arthur McKinley, was pushed to the ground by a pack of bikers who thought no one was watching. But someone was. Jason Statham didn't just see it, he stepped forward, and what happened next silenced an entire town. Stay with us until the end, because this isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of dignity, of legacy, of what it means when the world forgets its quiet heroes. If you believe in stories that remind us of real strength, the kind that doesn't chase applause, consider subscribing. This one will leave you remembering long after the final second. The sun melted softly over the edge of town, painting the sidewalks and storefronts in bands of gold that stretched long like old scars across the land. Arthur McKinley moved slowly, his cane tapping in careful rhythm, each step a quiet negotiation with his aching knees, each breath a reminder of the 95 winters, summers, and battlefields he had survived. He wore an old wool coat, too heavy for spring, and a battered fedora that had once been navy blue, but now hovered somewhere between grey and memory. Pinned carefully inside his coat was a small metal box, a box that had traveled across oceans, through foxholes, through loss, through love. The kind of box only a man like Arthur could carry, one shaped more by weight than by size. The town had moved on long ago. The shops hummed with younger faces. The streets buzzed with a pace that had no patience for the slow, steady men who had built the bones of this place. Even the war memorial, where Arthur visited every Sunday, stood chipped and fading, the names on its plaque half-worn, the flowers around its base tangled with weeds. But Arthur didn't mind. He knew something the others didn't. And on this day, under the quiet glow of the sinking sun, Arthur moved toward the heart of town, unaware that his quiet walk would soon rupture the stillness, spark a storm, and remind an entire city what real strength looked like. If you believe in stories that honor the quiet heroes, the ones the world forgets, the ones who carry dignity in their bones and history in their scars, stay with us. And if you want more stories like this, consider subscribing. Because this isn't just a story of revenge, this is a story of memory, honor, and the moment one man stood up for another when no one else would. Arthur's cane tapped near the curb. He paused to let a truck pass, his fingers brushing his coat pocket instinctively, making sure the box was still there. It was. It always was. Across the street, the rumble of motorcycles rolled low, steady, like a warning buried inside the asphalt. 5 bikers, leather jackets stitched with skull patches, faces half-shaved, half-snarling, eyes that scanned not with curiosity, but with hunger, the kind of men who fed on weakness, or what they thought was weakness. Arthur kept moving. He didn't flinch. He had faced worse than this decades ago, in places these men couldn't pronounce. But age has a way of making even the strongest shoulders bow. And the bikers noticed. They blocked his path. First with a smirk, then with a step forward, then with a laugh that bit through the evening air. Arthur's hand tightened around his cane. He didn't speak. He had no reason to. One biker, the tallest, thickest, loudest, leaned forward, close enough that Arthur could smell the stale beer on his breath. With a shove, casual but cruel, the man pushed Arthur's shoulder. The world tilted. Arthur stumbled, knees buckling, hands flailing for balance. The small box in his coat clinked faintly as his body hit the ground. His cane skittered across the sidewalk. Dust lifted in a tiny cloud, and for a moment, no one moved. The bikers laughed, harsh, sharp, victorious. A car rolled past, slowing slightly, but no one stepped out. A woman glanced through a storefront window, but her gaze slipped away like water. Arthur, on his hands and knees, breathed slowly, deeply. This was not his first fall. This would not be his last rise. Across the street, by the edge of the cafe, Jason Statham watched. He hadn't planned to stop here today, but something in the air had made him pause. A shift, a crack, a smell of trouble long before the sound. Jason's eyes didn't blink. His breath didn't change. He watched the way only men who've seen too much know how to, quietly, completely. The bikers didn't notice him yet. They were too busy mocking, too busy celebrating their easy triumph. Jason's gaze drifted downward, just slightly, to the small box that had slipped from Arthur's coat pocket. It lay half open, the lid flipped back. Inside, a medal glinted in the fading light, old, tarnished, but unmistakable. Purple Heart. Jason's jaw tightened, not from anger, not from rage, from memory, because he knew exactly what that medal meant. And more importantly, he knew exactly what kind of man you had to be to carry one. The tallest biker raised his boot, pressing it near Arthur's cane, ready to kick it further down the street. Jason stepped away from the cafe. Slow, deliberate. The kind of movement that shifts gravity, that signals without words that the room, the street, the air has just changed. The smallest biker noticed first. His laughter hitched, his smile flickered, his eyes darted toward the figure crossing the street. Jason didn't run. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't need to. Arthur, still on his knees, reached slowly for his cane, unaware that someone else was moving toward him, unaware that the balance of the moment had shifted. Jason stopped near the cane, crouching in one smooth, controlled motion. He picked it up, brushing the dust from its handle, and placed it quietly into Arthur's waiting hand. Arthur looked up, his eyes clear, sharp, understanding. No words passed between them. None were needed. The bikers stiffened, realizing, too late, that they were no longer laughing at a lone old man. They were standing on a line they hadn't even seen, and Jason Statham was on the other side. Jason's eyes lifted past the bikers to a figure in the distance, a man in a dark coat, half hidden in shadow, watching, not part of the biker gang. Something else. Someone else. Jason's heart slowed, sharpened, because this wasn't random. This wasn't just about Arthur. This was bigger, and Jason knew he was already in it. The night deepened, sinking its cool fingers into the edges of the town as Jason helped Arthur to his feet. The old man's cane trembled slightly under his grip, but his eyes remained steady, the kind of eyes that had stared into gun barrels, battlefield smoke, and the long, empty stretch of decades that followed. Jason didn't speak. He offered no comforting words, no small talk, no questions. Instead, he placed a firm hand beneath Arthur's elbow, guiding him toward a bench just outside the square. The bikers lingered in the distance, their laughter fading into uneasy mutters, their bravado leaking like air from a punctured tire. They didn't follow, not yet, but Jason could feel their eyes. And beyond them, he could feel the presence of the shadowed figure still watching, the man in the dark coat. As Arthur settled onto the bench, Jason's mind drifted backward, unbidden, to the flashes of his own past. The medals, the missions, the faces he had left behind. He had seen men like Arthur before, not just veterans, but survivors. Men who had carried the weight of nations on their backs, only to return home and find the world had moved on without them. Arthur rested both hands on his cane, head bowed slightly, breath slowing. His hat had been knocked slightly askew in the scuffle, and Jason reached out, gently adjusting it back into place. The old man gave the faintest nod, the kind of silent gratitude that spoke louder than words. Across the square, a young woman appeared, rushing toward them, her face pale, her eyes wide. Jason recognized the shape of fear in her body before she even arrived. Arthur's granddaughter. She fell to her knees beside the old man, clutching his hand, eyes darting to Jason with a mix of confusion and desperate relief. Jason stepped back, giving them space, but his attention was already elsewhere. Because behind the bikers, that shadowed figure hadn't moved. Jason's instincts sharpened. This wasn't random. The bikers were loud, sloppy, drunk on their own noise. But the man watching was something else, something colder, something calculated. Jason's phone buzzed once in his pocket, a message. He glanced at the screen. No name, no number, just a line of text. "Walk away, Statham, this isn't yours." Jason exhaled slowly, not from surprise, not from concern, from confirmation. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, eyes flicking across the square. He scanned exits, pathways, windows, rooftops, the way a man does when he knows the storm hasn't started yet, but the pressure has already changed. Arthur's granddaughter helped the old man to his feet again, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped his arm. Jason watched them for a moment, then stepped forward, placing himself between them and the bikers, his presence a quiet shield. The bikers shifted, restless. The tallest one, the one who had pushed Arthur, squared his shoulders, puffed his chest, but Jason didn't flinch. He didn't raise his hands, he didn't need to, because sometimes the loudest warning comes in the silence, and Jason had mastered that silence long ago. Arthur's eyes drifted up to Jason's once more, a flicker of recognition sparking there, not just gratitude, not just respect. Recognition. He knew this wasn't over. Jason placed a hand gently on Arthur's shoulder, then nodded toward the edge of the square, urging the old man and his granddaughter to move. They hesitated, just for a breath, but Jason's calm presence reassured them. They began walking slow but steady toward safety. Jason stayed behind, his body turned slightly, his weight balanced, eyes never leaving the bikers. Not one of them dared step forward. The shadowed figure, however, did. From the edge of the alley, the man in the dark coat emerged, his face still obscured by the streetlight's angle. Jason felt the shift immediately, the change in posture, the change in air. This wasn't just another drunk. This was the reason the bikers were here. This was the man who had set it all in motion. Jason's mind turned quickly, cataloging details. The cut of the coat, the weight of his steps, the tilt of his head. Military, maybe. Organized, definitely. Not someone who relied on brute force, someone who moved pieces from the shadows. The man raised a single hand, a faint, dismissive gesture. The bikers hesitated, then backed away. One by one, they peeled off, leaving Jason alone in the square, facing the figure across the distance. Jason didn't move, he didn't chase, not yet, because the first rule of control is knowing when to hold the line. And Jason Statham had learned long ago that the most dangerous moment is not the fight itself. It's the decision to enter it. The figure in the coat turned slightly, just enough for the light to catch a glint of metal at his collar. A badge. Not a gang leader, not a criminal, law enforcement. Jason's chest tightened because this wasn't just a street fight. This was a setup, and the line between right and wrong had just blurred. Fast. The moon had fully risen by the time Jason stood alone in the square, the cool night air brushing against his skin like a whisper. The figure with the badge was gone, melted back into the shadows, leaving behind only questions and a tightening knot in Jason's chest. He turned slowly, scanning the street. The bikers had scattered, their engines fading into the distance like the last notes of a bitter song. The storefront lights flickered. Somewhere, a dog barked once and fell silent. Jason's boots crunched softly over the pavement as he made his way toward the bench where Arthur and his granddaughter had been sitting moments earlier. They were gone now, wisely moving out of the open, but they had left something behind, the small box Arthur had been carrying. Jason crouched, lifting it gently. It was heavier than it looked, the kind of weight that came from decades, not metal. He opened it carefully. Inside lay the Purple Heart, old, worn. Its ribbon faded to a pale ghost of the color it once was. But tucked beneath it, folded neatly, was something Jason hadn't expected. A photograph. 8 men in uniform, mud-streaked faces, weary smiles, arms slung over each other's shoulders. Jason's eyes moved across the photo slowly, methodically, until they stopped. There, on the edge, a younger Arthur, unmistakable, his features strong, his posture straight. But beside him, leaning slightly into frame, was another man, younger, sharper, a smirk on his face. And Jason's breath hitched slightly, because he knew that face. It wasn't from the news. It wasn't from a file. It was from his own past. Years ago, another mission, another country. A man who had slipped through the cracks, disappeared, presumed dead or retired. And now here, in a decades-old photo, standing beside Arthur McKinley. Jason's fingers curled slightly around the edge of the photograph. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random. Arthur wasn't just some old man who got caught in a bad moment. He was connected to something much deeper, something Jason had once chased and thought was long buried. The pressure in Jason's chest sharpened. The past wasn't just knocking, it was standing at his door. He tucked the photograph carefully back into the box, closing the lid with a soft click. The weight of it settled into his hand like a stone, like a promise. He stood, scanning the square once more. The street was still, but his instincts hummed. This wasn't over, not even close. Across town, Arthur and his granddaughter sat quietly inside a small, dimly lit diner. The old man sipped slowly from a chipped mug, his hands trembling only slightly as he held the cup. His granddaughter watched him, eyes wide, her voice low as she asked questions he didn't answer. Because Arthur knew. He knew the danger wasn't just the bikers or the shadowed man with the badge. It was the past, and the past never stays buried. Jason moved down the street, his footsteps measured, his mind sharpening with every step. He wasn't looking for the bikers. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for the truth. Half an hour later, he reached the edge of town. An old warehouse loomed in the dark, its windows blacked out, its walls scarred by time and silence. This was where the bikers had fled, but Jason knew they weren't the real threat. They were pawns, pieces on a board someone else was moving. He circled the building once, twice, mapping exits, counting shadows. Inside, he could hear muffled voices, low, urgent, sharp. And then, faintly, a name. McKinley. Jason's jaw tightened. Arthur wasn't just a target of random cruelty. He was a name still whispered in dark corners, still written in old ledgers, still tied to secrets that hadn't been silenced. Jason took a slow breath, steadying his mind. He wouldn't rush in, not yet, because the most dangerous moves were the quietest, and the only thing louder than violence was patience. Cliffhanger. End of chapter 3. From behind him, a faint click, the unmistakable sound of a gun's safety being switched off. Jason froze, not out of fear, out of calculation, because whoever was standing behind him, they hadn't just come to scare him, they had come to end it. The air behind Jason thickened, every muscle in his body locking into place as the soft click of the safety echoed louder than the night itself. He didn't turn, not yet. He let the silence stretch, let the tension build, because sometimes stillness could squeeze more fear into a room than any sudden move. He could hear the slow, deliberate breath of the man behind him, controlled, measured, not a jittery punk, not a reckless thug. This was a professional. Jason's eyes flicked to the nearest window, its reflection giving him just enough. Tall frame, dark coat, steady hands, not one of the bikers. The shadowed figure, the one from the square. Jason's heart beat once, calm and precise, as his mind mapped a dozen outcomes. He didn't need to win the moment with speed, he needed to win it with control. Then, without warning, a voice sliced through the dark, not loud, but sharp. "Walk away, Statham. You don't know what this is." Jason inhaled slowly, the cool air tightening his chest, the edges of memory pressing in like old ghosts. He knew exactly what this was, and that was why he couldn't walk away. With a sudden, clean motion, Jason pivoted, Not a full turn, just a shift, enough to deflect, enough to redirect. The gun hand wavered for half a breath. That was all Jason needed. His hand shot up, not to strike, but to grip. Wrist, elbow, angle, pressure. The weapon tilted just enough, the balance broken. A struggle without a sound. Two men locked in the kind of fight that didn't need noise to be lethal. The gun hit the ground with a dull thud. Jason pushed back, not with brute force, but with calculated weight, sending the man stumbling against the warehouse wall. Not knocked out, not broken, but exposed. The streetlight caught his face now. Jason's eyes narrowed. He recognized him. Not from the streets, not from criminal records, from old files, old missions. A former intelligence officer, presumed dead, buried in classified reports. But here he was, alive, and watching Arthur McKinley. Jason's voice was a thought, unspoken but sharp in his mind. Why? Why Arthur? Why now? What was buried so deep in this old man's past that it had survived decades, governments, wars, only to surface here on a quiet American street with Jason in its path? The man in the coat straightened, his breath rough, his eyes locking onto Jason's. And for a brief moment, no one moved. Then faintly, the sound of engines in the distance. The bikers were returning, but Jason knew now they weren't coming back as bullies. They were coming back as soldiers. Pieces in a game neither they nor the town understood. Jason stepped back, planting his feet, scanning the edges of the warehouse. He had no backup, no weapons, just his mind, his body, and the knowledge that some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. The man in the coat spoke again, softer this time. You should have walked, Statham. You should have let the past stay buried. Jason's jaw clenched. Because if there was one thing he had learned, one thing he had carved into his bones after every mission, every loss, every buried name, it was this: the past never stays buried. The first bikes roared into view, headlights slicing through the night. Jason's hands flexed once, twice, ready. He wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here for glory. He was here to finish what someone else had started decades ago. And Arthur McKinley, the forgotten, bent-backed, cane-clutching veteran, was the last piece of a story that still had power to shatter everything. Cliffhanger. End of Chapter 4. As Jason braced, eyes locked on the approaching bikes, the man in the coat pulled something from his pocket. Not a weapon, not a badge, a photograph. He held it up, letting Jason see. Arthur, decades younger, standing beside the very man Jason now faced. Jason's breath caught just for a second, because the enemy wasn't just in front of him. The enemy had once been beside Arthur himself. The night wrapped tighter around the old warehouse as the bikers roared closer, engines rumbling like a coming storm. Jason stood still, his breath slow, the faintest chill brushing his skin. Across from him, the man in the coat still held up the photograph, an image Jason couldn't look away from. Arthur McKinley, decades younger, stood proudly in uniform beside this very man. Brothers in arms once, now divided by time, betrayal, and buried truths. Jason's mind raced. This wasn't about gang turf or random violence. This was about secrets left to rot too long, rising now in the most dangerous form, unfinished history. He exhaled once, steadying himself. The first biker skidded to a stop, gravel spitting beneath his tires. Another pulled up behind, then another, until the group formed a loose semicircle, their leader's face hardening as his eyes darted between Jason and the man in the coat. But Jason noticed something else. The tension in the bikers' bodies wasn't the cocky swagger of bullies. It was confusion, uncertainty. They didn't fully understand why they were here. They had been called in as muscle, but for a game they didn't know the rules of. Jason's gaze flicked back to the man in the coat. Who are you really? The question sat heavy in the space between them. The man spoke softly, just loud enough for Jason to hear. "You were supposed to walk away." Jason didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the truth had already broken open. Behind them, from the edge of the street, a soft tapping sound emerged. Cane against pavement. Arthur McKinley. His granddaughter beside him, one hand on his arm, the other gripping the small box Jason had returned earlier. Arthur stepped forward, slow but steady, eyes fixed not on the bikers, not on Jason, but on the man in the coat. Jason felt the weight shift. He stepped slightly aside, giving Arthur space. The bikers fidgeted, their leader whispering sharp orders. But no one moved, because something far bigger than fists and guns was unfolding. Arthur stopped just a few feet away, his cane planted firmly, his chest rising and falling as he drew in a long, careful breath. His granddaughter's grip tightened on the box that carried the medal, the photograph, the proof. Jason saw it then, clear as if the past were bleeding into the present. These two old soldiers, once brothers, had stood side by side in a war that ended on paper but never in their hearts. And somewhere along the way, their paths had split. One had come home quietly, the other had disappeared into shadows. Now, under the weight of decades, they stood facing each other once more, not as friends, not as enemies, but as the last witnesses to a truth no one else in this town even knew existed. The air thickened. Jason could feel the tension in the bikers' shoulders, the way they shuffled, unsure if they were supposed to fight or wait. The man in the coat gave a faint nod, a silent signal. Jason inhaled sharply, because he knew what was coming. But before anything could break, Arthur raised one frail hand, not in surrender, not in defense, in command. The bikers hesitated. The man in the coat faltered just for a second, and Jason stepped forward, filling the space between Arthur and danger, not to steal the moment, to guard it. With one swift motion, Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded photograph he had taken from Arthur's box. He held it up, high, clear, undeniable. The past laid bare. The truth no longer hidden. The bikers looked around, uncertain. The man in the coat's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, calculating his next move. But Jason didn't move. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't need to, because the most powerful message was already in the air. This was never about dominance. This was never about territory. This was about legacy, about which man would carry his past with honor, and which man would keep trying to outrun it. Arthur's granddaughter stepped forward, lifting the box between her hands. The Purple Heart gleamed faintly under the streetlights. Jason saw it ripple through the group, the recognition, the sudden understanding. Even the bikers, once puffed up with false bravado, now shrank slightly, realizing they had been used as pawns in a story far older and heavier than their fists could ever hold. Jason exhaled a deep, slow breath, because the fight was over, not with blows, not with victory laps, but with presence, with truth. The man in the coat stared at Arthur for a long, heavy moment. Then, without a word, he turned, disappearing into the night, his silhouette fading into the alleyway. The bikers followed, engines rumbling reluctantly, wheels crunching over gravel until the night swallowed them whole. Jason turned back to Arthur, who stood quietly, cane-planted, granddaughter at his side. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. None were needed. Jason reached out, brushing the dust from Arthur's sleeve, the faintest gesture of respect. Then, with one last glance at the fading shadows, Jason stepped back, his figure blending slowly into the edges of the street, disappearing as quietly as he had arrived. The night settled again, still, whole. And as Arthur and his granddaughter turned toward home, the town behind them finally, for the first time in decades, remembered. Final emotional line, because real strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply stands, steady, unshaken, when the world tries to forget.